rolling anytime.
All right, Breda, we'll start. Would you please tell me your name?
Do you want the full version?
Please.
It's Breda Dolores Francis Maria O'Sullivan. I was given quite a mouthful.
And why? How did all those days come about?
Well, the Breda bit came about because I had an aunt in Kerry who was my godmother, and she was Breda, or Bridie as they'd call her down in Kerry, so I became Bridie. I was born in September, on September 17th, and I think the Feast of Our Lady of Dolors is on September the 15th. And my mother always had great devotion to Our Lady in her various incarnations. And so that's where the Dolores came from. And she tells a story that I was born in the Porciuncula nursing home in Ballinasloe, that there was a nun there who was pretty much a terror of the hospital, and she had great devotion to St. Francis. And she almost threatened my mother not letting me go home with her unless Francis was somewhere in the mix. So Francis, to appease this nun in the Porciuncula nursing home, had to be put in there. And then Maria was my confirmation name. It is a mouthful.
It is a mouthful,
I know.
that's right. And now you said Porcelana? Is that what you said?
The Porciuncula.
And where is that?
In Ballinasloe in Galway.
Galway.
Yeah.
All right, so you were born in Galway.
I was, yeah. My dad, you see, worked with the... well, he ended up in Dublin in the Department of Education, but at the time he was the principal in the vocational school in Ballinasloe. And so my brother and I were born in Ballinasloe, but I was only about 10 months old when we moved to Dublin. So I have no memories of it.
Yes, all right, okay. And you said you have siblings. What are they? Who are they?
My sister Maura is the eldest. She's a nun, a ban rialta, as they'd say in Irish. And my brother Brian was in the middle. Brian unfortunately died the year before I came to America, and then there was me. My mother would have had 20 of us if she could have had it, but it didn't work out that way for her. Yeah.
The nursing home, is that similar to a hospital? What we would call a hospital here?
Yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah. It was a local hospital in Ballinasloe. I think, they serviced every need at the time. Whatever was wrong with you, from, a sore toe to a brain injury, you went into the Porciuncula.
Okay. And your occupation?
I'm a teacher.
And is that your father's influence?
Probably. Education. Like my sister is... she retired this year. My sister is a teacher. My mother was a teacher. My aunt was a teacher. Yeah, it is. It's in the family.
Kind of runs in the family.
Yeah, it
yes,
does. Yeah.
Where were your parents born and raised?
Mommy and Daddy were both born in Ballyferriter in West Kerry, from the Gaeltacht, the Irish language speaking area. And I mean, it has to be one of Kerry well. It has to be one of the most beautiful places on God's earth. It's gorgeous. It's in the most southwesterly tip of Ireland. Next parish is Long Island, I suppose.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And so, how did they meet?
They knew each other always. They lived about a mile or two away from each other. Mommy's father, my grandfather, was the schoolmaster in one of the local schools. Yes, they lived in the village of Ballyferriter. They were posh because they owned a shop as well as having, their dad, who was the school principal. My dad came from a farm out the road. Although he says they couldn't stand each other when they were growing up. They knew each other, but, Mommy's family would have been considered a little bit more upper crust. If you can describe Ballyferriter as being upper crust at any point in time in life. But they probably started going out with each other when they went to Galway, although my mother always says that she wanted to enter the convent. She wanted to become a Poor Clare nun. And they were one of the enclosed orders, I think. And, I guess Daddy changed her mind for her, but they both would have gone to UCG up in Galway. And that's when they got to know each other and started dating each other. And then, although Daddy would have been a bit ahead of her, and he tells great stories when they were dating, like she was in Galway and he was teaching in Carlow, and he would cycle. He would actually get on his bike and cycle from Galway to Carlow to spend a couple of days, and Galway to Carlow back. They just... those things were done.
Would that have been?
That's a fair old bunch of miles. I couldn't tell you how many, but it's got to be at least 80. Wouldn't it be?
Yeah, that's quite a way.
Yeah. But they thought nothing of it, I mean, anywhere they wanted to go, they had to get on a bicycle, either A, walk, or B, get on a bicycle, and, that's what they did.
And just get there.
Yeah.
I suppose the attraction was they knew each other?
They knew each other, yeah, they did. And I think as my dad, when he went to Galway, I mean, the joke was that, my mother's family was a little bit more upper crust, but my father would always have been a bit of a scholar, and my mother's father, my grandfather, was known locally as a real scholar, and my father had great time for him and used to spend an awful lot of time with them. And the fact that they spoke the Irish language, they knew where they came from. They just there was a lot of common ground between them. And I guess there's always that piece of attraction that there's no accounting for.
What was your mother's maiden name?
She was Eileen O'Brien. Eileen Nuvrian.
Okay. And so pretty much basically their families going back were all from Ballyferder area?
Everybody.
Wow.
Everybody, yeah. It's, born and raised in the mountains, and, the old expression, it's a post ban on Slieve, you marry someone from the mountain. What is it? I can't remember what it is. Basically, the idea is if you marry someone from the mountain, you marry the whole mountain. And that's the way it would have been down there, because everybody, until, I suppose, the turn of the century when they started going out to America, but everybody was from there, yeah. And that's why even when you go down there now, I mean, I'm still related somehow or other to so many people because of both parents being from there.
Right.
And everybody down there is related to everybody else. Probably a bit of inbreeding and all the lunacy that goes with it. But we don't have to go into that. No.
Did your what do you think decided your father and mother to move away from that environment, having been so immersed in it?
There really wasn't anything there, There really wasn't anything there. In terms of farming, my dad's farm, 6 of them were raised on a farm that was 45 acres. Well, that wasn't going to sustain anybody. In terms of mom and teaching, there was only so many teaching jobs available in the local schools or in Dingle. So it really was either go to America, or 1 or 2 people might have stayed on the farm. Daddy went and he got a job working with, well, as I said, he was teaching first of all in a vocational school in Ballinasloe, and then he would have got a job with the Department of Education in Dublin, so he would have moved to Dublin. Mommy would have moved out. Again, her sister stayed. Her only sister stayed at home and took care of their grandfather, and Daddy's only sister stayed and took care of their parents, and everybody else, scattered. There really wasn't much choice. There wasn't much of an existence. We go down to Kerry now, and it too, Peg, that you see huge big farms, you see wealth, you see people, coming down, building second homes. Well, that's not the way it was. My dad often tells the story of climbing a mountain behind his house in Imala with a friend of his, and they were in their teenage years. And when you climb up this mountain, you go out and you just see the most extraordinary scenery that you could imagine. You can almost see to America. You see the Blasket Islands, you see Smerwick Harbour, you can see over to Valencia, to Cahersiveen, everywhere. And Daddy always says he stood up there, and in Irish he said to me, "Christ nach Grán and Duhi," and in English that means, "Christ, isn't this ugly countryside?" But you know why? And it makes sense, because to him it meant hardship, it meant poor land, it meant trying to eke out an existence, a very meagre existence in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. When he was a boy, yeah.
Because that's what it meant to him. And sometimes it's hard to take that perspective when you see what it is today, but to them, that was their reality. And for most of my dad's generation, they couldn't get out of it quick enough. They hated it. We all love to go back. But they wanted out, and many of them went and came to America, and they didn't look back.
Yeah. Coming over the Connor Pass a year ago, there's a little house way down deep in the valley, way down, and it turned out it was a cousin's of mine's husband's family's home. I couldn't even imagine how they ever even got up the side of the mountain, never mind lived that kind of an existence.
Hard days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. So did your mother continue working after the children were born? Or?
No, she wouldn't have been allowed. Those were the days you had to give up. She wouldn't have had a choice.
Right.
Yeah, once she got married, you gave up, yeah.
So your home, where in Dublin area did you live?
Clontarf. It's on the north side, about 3 miles out from the city centre, and most conveniently only about 10 minutes from the airport.
when you go back now, right?
Yes, or when I was leaving,
Yes.
whenever I came and went. Yeah, north side of Dublin.
And what is Clontarf? What type of a setting would it be in?
It's a suburban setting. You know, we lived on a road, Kincor Avenue, with semi-detached houses, two houses, two houses, two houses. Our house was actually built on the lands of Lord Vernon. Clontarf Castle is just behind us, and it was one of those great big estates where over time a family couldn't afford to hold on to it, and so the lands were sold, and, you know, builders. So it was Lord Vernon of Clontarf actually owned the land that our house was built on.
So are there walls around it?
The castle is still there, and it's now turned into a hotel. And part of the original wall and one of the gate lodge, and there's an extraordinarily old cemetery that's been preserved, and that's still there. So it's very much a part of the neighbourhood. Yeah, we as kids used to play over there all the time. We used to have great fun. There was woods and everything in behind it, and they've all been developed now. And, you know, going into the graveyard and, you know, spooking ourselves.
Yes.
Of course, of course.
How many people lived in your home?
5 of us. Mother, father,
And
3 of us. Yeah.
So no grandparents?
No, they were all down in Kerry.
They stayed there.
Yeah.
They stayed there. If you were standing now and opened up the door and you were looking out, what would you see as you look out the door?
The house across the road. The one thing about the house across the road that was a little bit different, my best friend lived in there, and all of us had red brick houses. Their house, for some reason, had the top part of their house was whitewashed. So it was always a great, you know, it's just a big long city street. So it was always great when you're telling people where we lived, it's the house opposite 2 whitewashed houses. Yeah, sorry.
that was
And if I looked out the back window, I saw the house behind me. But you could always see, when you looked out the back, you'd always see the castle, you know, above the line of the houses.
Oh, that was up kind of on a hill?
No, it was a big castle.
Just a big castle.
Yeah.
Now, did your family home in Kerry, was that kept in the family? I mean, is it the house your father was born in and your mother?
Daddy's house was kept in the family until about 5 years ago, actually, which was great. His, we used to spend all our summers, you see, in Kerry. We were kind of like fish out of water in Dublin in a way, because the fact that we spoke the Irish language, it set us a little bit apart. And as soon as school ended, my mother and father would pick us up and brought us down to Kerry, and Daddy would dump us there, you know, with our grandparents, and he would come back and work in Dublin. So he'd be up and down throughout the summer. But what was the question? I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. It does happen to me.
No, you're doing just fine. What I don't remember.
You don't remember the question?
No. I got.
There's a pair of us
the
in
answer.
it.
Yes, yeah.
But we used to spend our summers down in Kerry anyway.
And what was that like? I was asking if the farms had still stayed.
Oh, that's what it was, yeah. So Daddy's parents, I mean, I have very strong memories of them in Nimilad. They were on the farm, you know, and I always remember going down to them. And my grandmother was one of those ladies. She had long hair, long skinny grey hair, but she'd tie it back in a little bun. And she'd always be spitting her hands, you know, to flatten it down. Or they had this stuff called Morgan's pomade, and she used to put that on her hair. And my sister, my older sister, I had fierce curly hair. Maura's was kind of more wiry and sticky outy. And Maura's hair used to drive my grandmother mad, and she'd always be trying to put the Morgan's pomade and Maura on her head. And Maura hated it because it stank like, you know, the old lady smell.
Yes.
You know, that old lady smell. In rural Ireland, it's not a bad smell, but it's a smell you'd associate with the old ladies in the church, you know. And she just, and then spitting on her hands. Maura always hated that. But what would happen was when we'd go to Kerry, Maura and my brother would stay on the farm with Daddy's parents, and I'd go back into, you know, Upper Ballyferriter with my mother and her father. Her mother, my mother's mother died when she was a baby. Shortly after she was born, she got TB. Yeah. But she had an aunt who was a housekeeper in a big house in Atlanta. And she came home from America to raise the kids, to raise my mother, her sister, and her brother. So she raised them. We called her Auntie always. My only memory of her is a very sick old lady in a bed. I was a little bit frightened by her, you know, and she always took snuff.
Oh, gosh.
And our job as kids, we used to have to go back to the village to get the snuff for her. And that again had, you know, a strong smell.
Yes.
But I spent my summers in that house with my mother simply because I had 2 first cousins there, 2 girls who were the same age as me. And then my brother and sister would come in from my grandmother's house every day because there was a bunch of cousins living in that house. So they'd come back every day, and they'd come back on the donkey and cart on their way to the creamery, and they were allowed, take the donkey and cart all the way back to the village. And, so we'd see each other that way. But I stayed in Ballyferret, and they were allowed to stay on the farm.
Right. So you're pretty much barefoot in the summer.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
and I know you can look back and, things seem like you're looking at them through rose-tinted windows. But in many ways, the freedom we had in those summers, because Kerry hadn't been discovered, really. Ballyferret hadn't been discovered as a holiday place. Roads were bad. It took us hours and hours and hours to get there. The movie Ryan's Daughter hadn't been made, so it wasn't on the map. And we could literally be let out in the morning, and you came home when you were hungry, and the one thing you had to do was be home for dinner and for your chores at night. And you could be out roaming the fields, hitching anywhere you wanted to, back on the beaches. It was just, they were great days.
And was it from the time you were just a tiny child, you started going back there
Yeah.
all summer, right through your teenage years
Yeah.
and all?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would now, standing there at the farm and looking out the door, what would you have seen?
Oh my gosh, from my mother's house looking out, you saw Smerwick Harbour, you saw the Three Sisters Mountains, and to your right you could see Mariach, the village of Mariach with the mountains there, and you could see Mount Brandon, which is the highest mountain in Ireland. Yeah, I mean pretty privileged.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stunning.
Yeah, yeah. Did you recognize it at all at that time?
No, you don't. I think it's only when you move away from it, in a sense. I mean, as I got older and began to go down, I did begin to see more of it, when you become a little bit more introspective about life. I did begin to, and certainly now that I'm living away in America, I go home and I realise both parents to be from somewhere like that and to be so rooted in an area, I consider it a privilege.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you started, your first language was Irish.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
I spoke it before I could ever speak English.
And how did you learn did you speak English because you were going
Oh,
to
we
school?
lived in Dublin. We lived in, Irish was this language that was spoken in the house, but you're surrounded by English, people on the street. So I don't think I was aware that I spoke two languages.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would say things not realising that it was Irish or English, because there's an expression for it, they call it macaronic, when you speak a mixture of both. In our house, someone could change mid-sentence from English to Irish, and it was probably only when I went to school. I mean, I have no conscious memory of becoming aware of it, but I knew as a kid it didn't seem like two languages. This was the way we talked in our house.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does. Did you ever have kids tease you about the fact that you were...
Well, it's funny, I didn't, but my older sister did. My older sister and I developed two sort of different roads with the Irish language, and the irony is that she ended up teaching Irish, and I never wanted to teach it. Never, even, because I had to teach it. I was an elementary school teacher in Dublin. It's the one thing I hated teaching. I think I loved it too much to want to teach it, and I don't know if that makes sense, but, there's an attitude in Ireland, there certainly was, and there still is, where there's resistance to the Irish language. Unfortunately, it wasn't taught well for a very long number of years, and people got to hate it, and I just, because I loved it so much, I didn't want to battle with that dislike. And yet my sister, who was very self-conscious growing up about Irish, and the minute we'd walk out the door, she would not talk Irish, because she had been teased. She had some kids in school who used to call her a taishe. Taishe in Irish means it is, but it became like a synonym for, I don't know if synonym is the word, but it became a teasing expression. Oh, she's one of the taishes. So Maura kept her mouth shut, but the irony is she's the one who ended up teaching it eventually,
yeah.
whereas I'd walk out the door and I'd want to talk it even louder. I think I always like being a little bit different.
And what do you think of the standardized Irish now that they're teaching?
Over in Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
It's not great. That attitude still prevails, unfortunately. There's a certain element of people who have great respect for the language, and the Gaelscoil idea of the elementary school or the high school where you learn everything through Irish has actually grown, but it's seen as a bit of an elitist thing. In terms of general use, it's still, and now that it's not mandatory for exams, people wouldn't have the same respect for it maybe.
Yeah.
But again, when you come away, I've discovered, because sometimes I go down to Fordham University to help out with the fundraiser on the Irish language program, and there's a huge amount of people who've left Ireland, came to America, and they look and they say, look what we had, you know, and they actually want to get back in touch with the Irish language and maybe relearn it.
Yeah.
There's a group here in the club who wants to learn the Irish
I
language.
just started taking it 2 weeks ago.
You know,
Yeah.
but the respect for it at home, even in the Irish-speaking areas, sadly to say, isn't great.
Yeah. I notice, you know, when I'm there, I put on TG Cara on the radio.
Yeah.
I don't understand it, but I listen to it and watch it on the television with the subtitles sometimes. But it's mandatory to take it in school.
It is, but it's not now mandatory in terms of getting into university. There was a time where you have to pass it in your leaving certificate to get into college. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah, I see.
You know, they're trying to take, I suppose, a stigma in a sense almost grew up around the Irish language, again, associated with Culshies people in the west of Ireland. One of the books we had to do in school was a book called Peg, and it was about Peg Sayers, who lived on the Blasket Islands. Well, you mentioned that book to anybody who had to study it, and they go, you know, Peg Sayers. It was beaten into them.
Yes.
And unfortunately, you know, that mentality stayed with a lot of people about the Irish language.
Yeah. Well, do you think the standardization is going to help insofar as Irish people who speak the language will be able to talk to other Irish people that speak the language? Because I know Galway, Donegal, Kerry, they speak different kinds of Irish.
They're different. They're different. I cannot communicate with someone from Donegal other than on a very functional level. They are so different, the dialects. They really are. And even if you didn't understand the language, you would hear the difference between them. You know, if you're from Munster and you want to say, now this is an extreme example, if you wanted to say, you know, hello, and as you know in Irish there's no word like hello, they're all religious kind of expressions, like God be with you, or you know, may the Lord do something for you. But in Kerry it'd say Conastántu.
Yes. You
go to Connemara and it's Cechuiltu. You go to Donegal and it's Gujémaratatu.
Wow.
Now that's different.
Yeah.
Now they're extremes, but
does
they're...
Does it all mean the same thing?
Basically, how's it going? The answer is going to be the same, you know? Yeah.
Wow.
They're different.
Yeah, really different. I never realized that. I had someone say to me, I couldn't talk to your family from Donegal. I couldn't talk to your family in Kerry.
Yeah. I can handle Connemara Irish. And Connemara Irish is basically standard government Irish. That's the one they chose. Donegal Irish is tough.
Well, now they're requiring documents to be written in Irish in Kerry, I know.
They always have. It's the official language of the country. Like any document, any official government document has to be written in Irish. The one good thing that's after happening in the last few years in Ireland, since we joined the EU, the Irish language became very marginalised, and there is a movement out there to have it recognised as one of the official languages of the country, of the EU, you know, because the fear is without that,